March 2011. A wave of rebellion sweeps through Libya. To the world, it looks like a spontaneous uprising, ordinary people rising up against a brutal dictator. But behind the chaos lies a secret decade in the making. This isn't just a revolution, it's the climax of a top-secret CIA operation that's been quietly unfolding for over 30 years. The mission? Take down Muammar Gaddafi. For decades, U.S. intelligence had its eyes locked on the man they called the mad dog of the Middle East. Gaddafi wasn't just another authoritarian ruler. He was a sponsor of global terror. To American leadership, he was dangerous and he had to go. And they didn't just want him gone. They wanted to send a message. Because when evil grows too bold, somebody has to step up and put a stop to it. Here's what most people never knew. As rebels fought their way through Libya, the man at the forefront of the uprising wasn't just some local hero. He was a longtime CIA asset. His name? Khalifa Haftar. Back in the 1980s, Haftar and his trusted circle were secretly trained by the CIA. They were armed, prepped, and kept on standby, ready for the day they'd be sent back to finish what they started. And in 2011, that day came. Haftar returned to Libya with one goal: to take out Gaddafi. By then, U.S. operatives were already on the ground. CIA experts were embedded with the rebels, directing, coordinating, quietly pulling the strings. This is the untold story of just how deep the CIA's role ran in the fall of Gaddafi. Langley, Virginia, CYA headquarters. Inside the North Africa Division, the mood is tense. Analysts are monitoring secret transmissions from inside Libya. Satellite feeds, electronic intercepts, the works. At first, it's all routine signal after signal, nothing out of the ordinary, until they hit message 388. Everything changes. The intercepted message is short and chilling. Stand by and be ready to attack American targets. Execute the plan. There's no ambiguity, no second guessing. It's a credible threat, and it's coming straight from Gaddafi's inner circle. Gaddafi had ruled Libya since 1969, when he led a coup against King Idris. He took power as a young colonel and never let go. He built his regime on fear, division, and brutal control. The army was fragmented by design, so no one could ever challenge him. In the early years, the West thought maybe, just maybe, they could work with him. That illusion didn't last. Once Gaddafi had a grip on Libya, he turned his attention outward. He began targeting political opponents abroad, sending hit squads to Europe and even the US. Anyone who spoke out against him was a potential target. He backed terrorist groups, funded training camps, handed out weapons, cash, even fake passports, and the CIA was watching. They believed Gaddafi wasn't just supporting terrorism, he was orchestrating it. His fingerprints were on multiple deadly attacks, including the 1985 airport massacres in Vienna and Rome. Americans and Israelis gunned down by Palestinian terrorists with Libyan support. To the US, Gaddafi wasn't just a threat. He was an unpredictable, ideological menace. President Reagan famously called him the mad dog of the Middle East, and he earned the name. Gaddafi dreamed of a global Islamic revolution. He spoke in riddles. He made wild threats. And yet he was smart, calculating, and dangerous. And now it seemed he was about to strike. Later that same day, CIA listening posts intercept another message. This time it's from Libyan intelligence operatives speaking to agents abroad. America had successfully tapped into much of Libya's diplomatic communication network. And while other regimes were cautious, Gaddafi's people were sloppy. That mistake would cost them. The message reveals the target location, Germany. Specifically, the communication comes from the Libyan embassy in East Berlin. It's a chilling boast. Tripoli will be happy when you see the headlines tomorrow. The CIA scrambles. They now know something is coming, but not exactly where, when, or who will be hit. The CIA station in Berlin goes on high alert. Every agent is activated. Informants are contacted. The race begins to uncover the plot before it's too late. This was the reality behind the headlines. What the world saw as a people's uprising was, behind the curtain, something far more calculated. The fall of Gaddafi wasn't just revolution, it was retribution, years in the making. And the CIA was right in the middle of it all. Time is running out. Despite hours of frantic investigation, CIA analysts have little to show for it, no clear leads, no solid intel. In Berlin, the night stretches on. Inside the LaBelle nightclub, a hot spot for American GIs, the crowd is living it up. Music blares, people laugh, dance, drink. No one notices the woman who walks through the door with a bag in her hand. Meanwhile, at CIA headquarters in Langley, Virginia, a chilling message comes through another intercept from the Libyan embassy in East Berlin. It's 1:30 a.m., just 3 words, happening now. Minutes later, chaos erupts in Berlin. A powerful blast tears through LaBelle. Screams replace music. Glass and smoke fill the room. 2 U.S. soldiers and a young Turkish woman are killed. Over 200 others are injured. It's one of the deadliest attacks on Americans in Europe in years. For the CIA, this is the moment they've been waiting for and dreading. For the first time, they have undeniable ironclad evidence. Muammar Gaddafi is directly behind the bombing. This isn't just suspicion anymore, it's proof. To Washington, the message is loud and clear. This wasn't a random act of terror. It was part of a deliberate pattern planned, funded, and approved by the Libyan regime. The U.S. government now had what it needed to act publicly, forcefully. This wasn't a case of picking a villain to make an example of. Gaddafi was guilty. He had blood on his hands, and it wasn't the first time. In the eyes of the Reagan administration, this was bigger than politics. This was about evil, real evil, the kind that doesn't negotiate, the kind that kills innocent people in nightclubs. Some may hesitate to use the word, but to Reagan, anyone who bankrolls terror and targets Americans, that's evil, and evil demands a response. So the decision is made. Muammar Gaddafi must pay. This bombing is the spark that ignites a firestorm. From the president down through the ranks of government, taking down Gaddafi becomes a top priority. The Reagan team saw this as a defining moment. America was done playing defense. It was time to draw a hard line. If you attack our citizens anywhere in the world, we will hit back. Not with warnings, with action. And at the tip of that spear is CIA Director William Casey. Casey wasn't your average bureaucrat. He was a bulldog, smart, ruthless, and absolutely unafraid to take risks. He didn't have patience for soft diplomacy. He wanted results. People called him unpredictable, intense, even a wild man. But to Reagan, he was the guy who could get things done. And Casey had a plan, a black ops mission to eliminate Gaddafi. But there was a catch, a big one. Back in the aftermath of Watergate, President Gerald Ford signed an executive order banning U.S. involvement in political assassinations. Reagan had reaffirmed that order early in his presidency, which meant technically killing Gaddafi was illegal. Even if the CIA wanted him gone, they couldn't just send in a hit squad, so Casey needed another way, a legal one. That left one path forward: open military action. Assassination might be off the table. But if the U.S. government could make the case that Libya was a threat to national security, then a strike on Libyan soil on its military and infrastructure was fair game. Still, taking Gaddafi down wouldn't be easy. Libya was a fortress. Gaddafi was surrounded by elite troops and protected by his infamous Amazonian female bodyguards. On top of that, the CIA had almost zero presence inside Libya. No local agents, no actionable sources. We didn't have the capability, one official later admitted, and yet despite the risks, despite the limitations, the operation moved forward. Because for the Reagan administration, the message had to be clear. If you kill Americans, we will come for you. The U.S. response wasn't some sneaky covert operation. This was full-on military action. President Reagan greenlit Operation El Dorado Canyon, no CIA hit squad this time. Instead, the plan was clear. Launch airstrikes on key military targets inside Libya. The target? What they officially called the command center. But everyone around the table knew exactly what that meant. It was Gaddafi's own home. This wasn't just any bombing raid. It was a heavy assault aimed right at the heart of Tripoli and Gaddafi's sprawling compound. In other words, it was an assassination attempt in all but name. Nobody was pretending otherwise. There were no jokes, no winks. Everyone understood the stakes. Taking out a leader's home is as targeted as it gets. Think about it. What's the difference between shooting someone in the head and dropping a 2,000-pound bomb on their house? None. So let's stop pretending. Operation El Dorado Canyon meant American planes striking multiple targets across Libya's biggest cities, Tripoli and Benghazi. The CIA was in charge of the intel, pinpointing exactly where to hit. Their photo analysis team, the National Photo Interpretation Center, provided the satellite images used to plan the strikes. Targets included military bases, government buildings, and anti-aircraft batteries. But the real prize was Gaddafi's command center, a huge compound smack in the middle of Tripoli. It wasn't just a military hub, it was also his home base. Inside that compound was a Bedouin tent, reportedly where Gaddafi spent most of his time. Here's the tricky part. The CIA needed to time the attack perfectly to catch Gaddafi in that tent. Without agents on the ground, that was almost impossible. The intel about Gaddafi's exact location was patchy at best. So Casey made a call to a trusted ally, Israel. The US and Israel shared tight political and intelligence ties. Mossad, Israel's secret service, set up a surveillance post overlooking Gaddafi's compound. They found the tent and confirmed that Gaddafi was indeed inside. Advisors waiting. An hour into the raid, two men showed up with a locked briefcase, and inside was a videotape that could change everything. The room falls silent as the president and his top military brass watch the footage. It's grainy black and white video from the F-111 bombers, showing their airstrikes pounding targets in Libya. The mission has launched. The stakes are high. Later that evening, President Reagan steps in front of the cameras to speak to the nation. At 7 o'clock this evening, Eastern Time, U.S. air and naval forces launched strikes on terrorist facilities and military sites linked to Muammar Gaddafi's operations, he declares in a firm, steady voice. The next day, a high-altitude reconnaissance plane, an SR-71 Blackbird, is sent up at dawn to capture images of the aftermath. It confirms what the CIA hoped for. Gaddafi's compound was hit hard. His famous Bedouin tent? Gone. But there's still one crucial unknown: is Gaddafi dead? Then, 48 hours later, the dreaded news hits the airwaves. "Good evening," says Dan Rather on CBS. Muammar Gaddafi is apparently alive, but there are still more questions than answers after the U.S. assault on Libya. Despite the destruction, Gaddafi survives. Worse yet, his regime spins the story, accusing the U.S. of targeting civilians. They claim falsely that his adopted daughter was killed in the raid, part of what they say are 60 casualties. The propaganda machine kicks into overdrive. For the CIA, the harsh truth settles in. Operation El Dorado Canyon missed its main mark. The mission didn't go as planned. Expectations had been high, perhaps too high. The reality? Gaddafi wasn't even scratched. With military action now off the table, CIA Director William Casey knows it's time for Plan B. And Plan B means going back to what the CIA knows best: covert operations. The goal remains the same: get Gaddafi out one way or another. And Casey doesn't much care how. His next move? Light a rebellion from within. Overthrow Gaddafi using his own people. It's not a new playbook, the CIA has done it before, from Guatemala to Chile. Arm rebel forces, train them, support them from the shadows. If it works, the U.S. keeps its hands clean. If it fails, well, the rebels take the fall. But there's a catch. To pull this off, Casey needs the right leader, someone who can rally the fractured Libyan opposition and unite them against Gaddafi. It's not easy. Libya, after all, isn't a country in the traditional sense. It's a patchwork of tribes drawn together inside colonial-era borders. There's no one-size-fits-all solution, and this isn't some Hollywood fantasy. Raising a tribal rebellion takes more than guns. It takes trust and the right face to lead. Casey spends months searching. He's looking for someone from inside Gaddafi's inner circle, a defector, a general, someone who knows how the regime ticks from the inside. Eventually, a name rises to the top: Colonel Khalifa Haftar. On paper, Haftar doesn't seem like the obvious choice. He was once one of Gaddafi's most trusted military commanders. But Casey sees something in him, a man with insider knowledge and ambition, maybe even a score to settle. To Casey, Haftar could be the key to starting the fire that finally burns Gaddafi's regime to the ground. Khalifa Haftar wasn't just any soldier, He was a battle-hardened military man whose story began alongside Muammar Gaddafi, right back to the revolution that toppled King Idris. He'd earned a reputation as a sharp strategist, a leader whose men respected and followed him without question. For years, Haftar was locked in a brutal fight with Libya's southern neighbor, Chad. Under Gaddafi's orders, he led a major push to occupy parts of the country territory Gaddafi had long had his eyes on. But in 1986, just as CIA Director William Casey was hunting for someone to spark a rebellion inside Libya, the tide turned. The Chadian army regrouped, hit back hard, and crushed Haftar's forces. Haftar and several hundred Libyan troops were taken prisoner. Back in Tripoli, Gaddafi was furious. His army was humiliated. Millions of dollars worth of weapons were lost, and he needed someone to blame. That someone was Haftar. Rather than rescue his former comrade, Gaddafi left him to rot in a Chadian jail cell. As far as he was concerned, those troops never existed. He completely disowned the failed operation, pretending not to know a thing about the Libyan soldiers now sitting in enemy prisons. But for the CIA, Haftar's capture was a golden opportunity. Here was a skilled military leader, betrayed and abandoned by Gaddafi, exactly the kind of person they needed to lead a rebellion. So Casey pulled a string. The CIA had long supported Chad's president, Hissène Habré, in his own battles against Gaddafi. Now it was time to cash in on that alliance. 7 months into Haftar's imprisonment, Habré personally paid him a visit. Word is, he came with an offer, one that could change everything. The deal? Join the fight against Gaddafi. Build an army in exile, lead a revolution back home, and this time, the United States would have his back. Abandoned by the man he once served, Haftar accepted. He and others like him would no longer fight for Gaddafi, they'd fight to bring him down. That was the beginning of the Libyan National Army. With the CIA's support, a small but potent force was assembled, built around the 300 men captured with Haftar. The US would arm, train, and fund them with one clear mission: spark a rebellion from within Libya. It was classic CIA playbook: train outsiders, provide the tools, and let them do the dirty work. From weapons to vehicles, cash to logistics, the CIA made sure Haftar's rebels were equipped for war. The idea wasn't to launch a full-blown invasion overnight, but to plant the seeds of resistance to ignite something that would grow into an uprising. Meanwhile, 2 years had passed since the US bombed Libya in Operation El Dorado Canyon. Gaddafi had gone eerily silent. From Washington's point of view, maybe the airstrikes had finally scared him off terrorism. But Gaddafi wasn't done. Behind closed doors, he was plotting something darker. And in late 1988, his plan came to life. At London's Heathrow Airport, Pan Am Flight 103 prepared to leave for New York. On board were hundreds of passengers, most of them Americans heading home for the holidays. Among the luggage was a suitcase. It belonged to a Libyan agent who never boarded the plane. 38 minutes after takeoff, as the jet soared over the Scottish town of Lockerbie, a bomb inside that suitcase exploded. The blast tore through the plane. All 243 passengers were killed, along with 11 people on the ground. It was one of the deadliest terror attacks ever against American civilians. Gaddafi had struck again. US officials later accused 2 Libyan intelligence agents of planting the bomb, acting on direct orders from Gaddafi's regime. It was the smoking gun. This time, the world responded not with more bombs, but with sanctions. Gaddafi was cut off, isolated, branded a rogue. But for the CIA, that wasn't enough. He had officially become America's #1 target. Back in Washington, all hopes were pinned on one man, Khalifa Haftar. The rebel commander trained by the CIA, leading a force built in exile, was seen as the best shot at removing Gaddafi once and for all. But then, just as the pieces were falling into place, new trouble erupted in Africa, and the CIA's plans began to unravel. 1990. The CIA's plan to overthrow Muammar Gaddafi is suddenly thrown into chaos. US military transport planes land in N'Djamena, the capital of Chad, and quickly evacuate Haftar and his fighters. But getting them out of Chad is only the beginning of a long and uncertain journey. First, they're flown to Nigeria, then to Zaire, then Kenya. But in each country, the answer is the same. You're not welcome here. These men, once seen as assets, are now political baggage. After months of limbo, the US is out of options. The CIA makes a stunning decision: bring the Libyan rebel force to America. Colonel Haftar, the man once chosen to lead an uprising against Gaddafi, is now living just outside Washington, D.C. in suburban Falls Church, Virginia. He has a comfortable home, a large family, and a quiet life. But he never gives up the dream of returning to Libya to finish what he started. His fighters are scattered across 25 states, their mission put on indefinite pause. For the CIA, it's a frustrating setback, but not the end. There's always hope that one day, Haftar and his men will get their chance. Meanwhile, time passes. Gaddafi remains in power, but he's feeling the pressure. Sanctions and international isolation have turned him into a political outcast. Then the world changes. September 11th, 2001. 19 terrorists hijack 4 planes and unleash the deadliest attack on American soil in modern history. The Twin Towers fall. The Pentagon is hit. The death toll is staggering. A new kind of threat has emerged, and it isn't Gaddafi, it's Al-Qaeda. This group is different. It's not backed by a country. It has no borders, no capital. It's a shadowy global network, far more elusive and dangerous than any dictator. America responds with force. President George W. Bush draws a line in the sand. Every nation, in every region, now has a decision to make. Either you are with us or you are with the terrorists. Gaddafi gets the message loud and clear. He pivots fast, publicly renouncing terrorism and scrambling to rebuild ties with the U.S. government. He offers to cooperate, to help, to play nice. But few are buying it. Analysts see it for what it is: survival. Gaddafi knows the Bush administration is focused on weapons of mass destruction. He sees what's happening in Iraq. Saddam Hussein is in the crosshairs, and Gaddafi doesn't want to be next. His transformation isn't about ideology, it's about fear. Desperate not to be labeled enemy number 1 again, Gaddafi makes a show of change. But behind the curtain, America still watches him and waits. Muammar Gaddafi had a stark realization. The Americans wanted one man to help bring order to the chaos of Libya's uprising, Khalifa Haftar. A former top commander in Gaddafi's army, Haftar had a personal score to settle. The betrayal he suffered in Chad 2 decades earlier had never left him. Gaddafi abandoned him, and Haftar had never forgiven him for it. Now he was ready to return, and this time it was war. Just a month into the 2011 Libyan revolution, Haftar landed in Benghazi with a few of his old officers. The crowd welcomed him like a hero. Within weeks, he was named commander of the rebel forces, and that's exactly what the CIA wanted. The rebellion was messy, unorganized, a wild mix of fighters with passion, but no clear structure. That's where Haftar came in. His mission was to professionalize this ragtag army. With him in charge, the CIA could finally help steer the uprising from the shadows. And while Haftar led on the ground, the US and its NATO allies took control of the skies. NATO flew over 17,000 missions that summer. Bombing runs, reconnaissance, supply drops, all of it required pinpoint coordination. CIA agents embedded on the ground guided the airstrikes, trained rebels, and helped them communicate and plan their next moves. Under this coordinated pressure, the rebels began to win. Key Libyan cities fell, one after another. After 6 months of brutal fighting, Tripoli, the heart of Gaddafi's power, collapsed. Gaddafi vanished. So did his sons. It was as if they disappeared into thin air. But the CIA wasn't done. They hunted Gaddafi with every tool they had. Eventually, intel led them to the coastal city of Sirte, where Gaddafi was holed up with a shrinking circle of loyalists. Rebel forces closed in, tightening the noose around the city from both sides. Then, in the early morning hours, something unusual happened. A convoy of vehicles tried to flee Sirte. From the skies, NATO aircraft were watching. CIA operatives tracked radio chatter and scanned satellite signals. Then it came a satellite phone pinged from inside the convoy. It was Gaddafi. The CIA immediately contacted U.S. drone operators stationed in Las Vegas. A Predator drone was launched from Sicily. It locked on. Hellfire missiles screamed down from the sky. NATO jets swooped in to finish the job. The convoy was torn apart. Gaddafi managed to escape the wreckage and ran. But it was over. Rebel fighters found him hiding in a drainage pipe. They dragged him out bloodied, dazed. Then chaos took over. Years of rage boiled over. The mob beat him, brutalized him, and threw his body across a car like a trophy. Libya's dictator, who once imagined himself a messianic figure for the Arab world, ended up beaten in the dirt by the people he ruled for 40 years. For the CIA, this was the payoff. They'd spent decades targeting Gaddafi. Now he was gone. The mission was complete, and Khalifa Haftar, trained by the CIA years earlier to topple the regime, had returned to help finish the job. While the world watched what seemed like a grassroots Libyan revolution, few realized just how much of it had been shaped behind the curtain by American hands. His plans to challenge the West were hitting a dead end. His grip on power was slipping, and worse, he could lose everything, even his life. The notorious Mad Dog of the Middle East suddenly did a complete 180, reinventing himself as a valuable ally in President George W. Bush's war on terror. It was a calculated move, one that changed everything. In a surprising turnaround, Gaddafi struck a deal with the US, and in Tripoli, he publicly announced he would reveal and dismantle all of Libya's weapons of mass destruction programs. It was almost unbelievable, a former international pariah transforming into a symbol of unilateral disarmament. Western leaders started visiting Libya, sanctions were lifted, oil began flowing again, and investment money poured in. With America's focus shifting squarely to al-Qaeda, Gaddafi successfully erased himself from the CIA's hit list. But let's be clear, no one ever saw Gaddafi as a trustworthy or honorable figure. His record was brutal and unforgivable. Still, American interests in the region evolved, and by 2009, Gaddafi had been invited to speak at the United Nations in New York. His comeback seemed complete. That is, until his speech shocked the world. In a fiery 90-minute rant, Gaddafi called the UN Security Council terrorists, accused President George W. Bush of war crimes, and demanded a staggering $7 trillion in reparations for colonialism. For the CIA, this was proof Gaddafi was as unpredictable and dangerous as ever. Then just 2 years later, a new chance to deal with Gaddafi emerged: the Arab Spring. Inspired by uprisings in Tunisia and Egypt, protests erupted across Libya. By February 2011, unrest in Benghazi exploded into a full-blown rebellion. Gaddafi responded by sending troops to crush the protests, confident the world would stand aside. He thought he was safe. He believed the US wouldn't intervene. He was wrong. As the protests turned violent and the opposition armed themselves, the US joined NATO allies to provide air support aimed at protecting Libyan civilians from Gaddafi's brutal crackdown. President Obama declared, "Today I authorize the armed forces of the United States to begin a limited military action in Libya." And just like that, the mission was underway. But the CIA saw a problem. Not all the rebel factions were aligned with American interests. The Transitional National Council, the rebel leadership trying to unify the opposition, was fractured and chaotic. Rivalries and infighting ran deep, and there was a very real fear that extremist groups like al-Qaeda might hijack the revolution. For the CIA, the solution was clear. They needed a trusted military leader to take command, someone reliable and capable. Their pick? Colonel Khalifa Haftar.